All right, we're back again. South Beach Gospel Ministries. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. We're back with the third part in a three-part series that we really started in honor of America's 250th birthday anniversary, which was this past 4th of July, a couple of weeks ago. We started on Memorial Day asking the question as to whether or not America was Mystery Babylon. There were a number of comments that have been made throughout the years about Mystery Babylon and what that really means. That reference is made in Revelation chapter 17, Revelation chapter 18, Mystery Babylon, and even in the Old Testament, Babylon is mentioned time and again. And a number of people have suggested, particularly since 9/11, that New York City might be the archetype for the Mystery Babylon that we saw, because it talked about, the mourners off in the distance, doing trade with this Mystery Babylon, and, smoke is arising from her destruction from God, and nobody does trade with her anymore. A number of people said at the time of the 9/11 tragedy that sounded a lot like the way New York City, especially Lower Manhattan, looked at the time. We came to the conclusion, after analyzing Bible prophecy and the like on our Memorial Day teaching, part one of this three-part series, that probably was not the case, that New York City is probably not the Mystery Babylon of the Bible, and that the Revelation chapter 17 woman that rides the beast is probably referring to the occultic mystery goddess system that has existed all the way back to the Tower of Babel from Nimrod and Semiramis. And that's why you have the Statue of Liberty standing in New York Harbor with the torch, because we have been influenced by the founding fathers, who were deists and illuminists, who looked at America as the new Atlantis we talked about. And so we came to the conclusion that Dave Hunt, in his excellent work, A Woman Rides the Beast, has pointed out that Rome is a city built on 7 hills. Revelation 17 talks about 7 hills, talks about a woman riding a beast. She's decked out in scarlet and purple, color of the Roman Catholic Church. And we came to the conclusion that probably the best interpretation of that biblical passage, and we know that the book of Revelation is both literally true and also uses symbols to teach things. We've come to the conclusion here, and you guys have had an opportunity to comment. You can, we're going to link down in the description box below the entire three-part series, so you can look at it, and then you can weigh in and say whether you think America's Mystery Babylon or not. But that was part one, and we came to the conclusion that based upon the writings of Dave Hunt and The Woman Rides the Beast, based upon the interpretation of the woman that rides the beast decked out in scarlet and purple, that's probably best referencing the Roman Church system. Roman Catholic Church has the Mystery Babylon system, the Queen of Heaven goddess system that we've talked about in times past here. And then at the halfway point of that tribulation period of 7 years, Daniel's 70th week, it looks like the Bible seems to suggest that Mystery Babylon religious goddess-based system is destroyed, and that centroid of power is transferred from the Vatican and Rome to possibly the city of Babylon in Iraq that might be rebuilt. Joe Chambers have talked about that, Chuck Missler, other individuals. And then we see at that point, during the second half of the tribulation period, you no longer need a female divine worship system that Satan has used throughout the years from the Garden of Eden till now, because he's now replaced that with his own son, the Antichrist. And that ties into the Freemasonic deistic religion of the Illuminati that talks about, the mythos of, whether you call it Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, or the Egyptians referred to it as Osiris, Horus, and Isis, the divine mother giving birth to the divine child Horus is really the father reincarnated. In Freemasonic legendary religious mythos and lore, you have that concept of the father being driven away from the world because of the evil people in the world. Read Christians, and that the Son will come and make the world able for the Father to make his return. And that mythos is tied together in Satanism and Illuminism and the occultism. That religious belief is believed that a biogenetic descendant of Lucifer will one day take over the world and make the world safe again for the reign of Lucifer on the earth. And again, that is going to occur, we believe, during the second half of that 70th week of Daniel, that 7-year tribulation period, the Great Tribulation period. You no longer need a goddess worship based system or false form of Christianity based around goddess worship. So God puts it in the heart of the Antichrist to destroy that system in Revelation 17. And in Revelation 18, during that last 3.5-year period of time, I think we see the worship of Satan himself in the person of his son the Antichrist, who is a type of the Tammuz of ancient Babylonian mythos, or a type of Horus in ancient Egyptology mythos. And so we talked about that, and for those reasons, that's why we came to the conclusion that America is not Mystery Babylon, though America was believed when we talked on the 4th of July, when we were last here, it was the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, and during that talk, we talked about the Founding Fathers. We asked the second question, if America is not Mystery Babylon, is America a Christian country then? And then we came to the conclusion that America is the set piece from which Christianity was launched around the world, and the most effective nation in the world with regards to the spreading of the gospel. But the country itself can't be Christian because a nation can't be born again. The people in the nation, however, were. And so we had what I refer to as a tale of two cities, the best of times and the worst of times. That famous work that's talked about the tale of two cities. It was that Charles Dickens said it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And sort of in American history, that's what we see. And we talked about that on our 250th anniversary, how if we are a Christian country, why on the dollar bill is there a truncated pyramid that's part and parcel of the Illuminati occult religious-based worship system with the all-seeing eye of Osiris above it? If we're a Christian country, why on our official dollar bill do we have the birth date not of the United States of America, which is July 4th, 1776, but rather we have May 1st, 1776. Is that a misprint? I would suggest not. May 1st, 1776 is commonly referred to as May Day. That's the birthday of the Bavarian Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt in Austria founded that secret society, or reinitiated the secret society that had always existed, going all the way back to the Tower of Babel, but had gone underground. Remember, we talked about the Freemasons and how they were driven out of Europe and they had to go into hiding. They went to Scotland, and then from Scotland they combined together with other secret societies and eventually came to the United States of America, and how the Founding Fathers were part and parcel of a religious-based system that believed that the new colonies that eventually became the United States of America were the new Atlantis. This idea that was really originally written about by Plato in his work, The Critias, about how Atlantis was the perfect city with these enlightened beings. And some people have suggested that might in fact be the pre-flood world that God had to destroy with the worldwide flood of Noah because of the fallen angels that came down from out of heaven and interbred with human females and created a whole race of super beings, and these super beings became referred to in the Bible as the Nephilim. And if that literally did occur, there should be legends and stories and histories about that, and maybe that is exactly what Plato was writing about in his Critias, and how that might come again. The deists, certainly in England, that were really the platform from which the colonies spread out from England. Remember that. We talked about Sir John Dee, who was 007, the Queen of England's spy, Sir Francis Bacon, who was this brilliant intellectual who advised the kings and queens of England, and how he believed that the American colonies were the new Atlantis. And that was picked up by Freemasons once the colonies were started. Jamestown started out as a Christian colony, 1602? But then 7 years later, you had the Ephrata Cloisters, which was a witchcraft colony. So you have both sides. You have good and bad at the same time. You have a Christian base of people, God-fearing Puritans who wanted to be free from the Church of England oppressive system, which had risen out of the Church of Rome system, and be able to read the Bible and worship God the way the Bible said, without having a king or a queen or some religious official telling you how to do it. And that's why they risked life and limb to come to the United States of America. But with that came the Founding Fathers. Remember, we talked about Benjamin Franklin was part of the Hellfire Club, which was part of this occult intellectual society based in London, England, that was involved in all types of things, including PDF file activity with children, maybe sacrifices with children, bones found under, the living room floor of Benjamin Franklin's flat in London. We talked about all those things. And so we came to the conclusion that no, America is not a Christian country, but at the very same time, America is the base from which Christianity was spread around the world by God. So again, we looked at the dollar bill, talked about why is the date of the Illuminati on there. We looked at the Washington Monument, and how that was a type of this mythos of Nimrod, Semiramis, and the divine son Tammuz being born, how the Capitol Rotunda is a symbol in stone of the impregnated belly of Semiramis, impregnated by her dead husband who was slain and supposedly became resurrected as the sun, impregnated her with a beam of sunlight so that the son that was born of that union was a divine child, Tammuz, which we see played out in stone with the Washington Monument, that tall obelisk form in the middle of the National Mall, down the mall from the rounded rotunda, which is a type of the belly of Semiramis impregnated by that beam of sunlight. We talked about how that same platform, that's not, Washington D.C. isn't the first place where that appeared. You have the exact same thing at the Vatican in Rome, that same rounded belly down the lane from an obelisk figure. And you have the obelisk figure obviously in Egyptology as well, and the mythos about how that was the reproductive organ of Osiris that was cut off by Seth when they had a battle and thrown into the Nile River. And then his wife, who was a witch and a supernatural being, you know, Isis, put him back together and brought him back to life again, and so on and so forth. And then he was able to use that to cause her to give birth to the divine child, who was referred to in Egyptology as Horus, the falcon-headed god, or a type of the Tammuz, who I would suggest to you is a type of the Antichrist. And so you have all of these occultic societies with their religious mythos, but they all tie back to the Bible. And what we read in Genesis chapter 1 through 6 and Genesis 6 through 10 and 11, the rise of the Tower of Babel, Nimrod, Semiramis, and that divine child mythos started right there, and that's what's gone forward. So we talked about that. So yeah, we came to the conclusion that while America is not a Christian country, we do find that America is the place from which Christianity was spread around the world. And today we're going to be talking about whether or not, in the third of the three questions in the third part of this series, we're going to be discussing the question, is Christianity dying in the West, including here in the United States of America? And we're, you know, based upon some research that I came across in the last couple of weeks since the 4th of July, we come to the conclusion that, you know, that's a nuanced question. So today we're going to be looking at the topic in the question of whether or not Christianity is dying in the West, including here in the United States of America. And the answer is kind of, yeah. But it's nuanced, so let's talk about it. Okay, so I stumbled across some data from an organization called the World Christian Database, and they do stuff, you know, they run numbers and tell us how many Christians are in each country. And an interesting article that popped up not too long ago that I stumbled across a week or so ago raised the question and laid out the statistical proof for the fact that Christianity, without question, in terms of a religious force, is in fact dying in the West. And when I say the West, I'm talking about the United States of America, North America, Canada, and I'm including Western Europe as well. And it's kind of shocking. Some of the results of the statistical assay is somewhat disturbing and somewhat shocking, but also at the same time we're going to conclude and find out that it's encouraging as well. So let's start out. The article really asks in the first paragraph, it says, if you ask somebody in the 1900s where the heart of Christianity beat the loudest in 2026, well, in the 1900s they would say London, Rome, you know, and they'd say, oh, well, you know, maybe in some Midwestern city. I grew up in a nice, you know, Christian Midwestern city, Ann Arbor, Michigan, you know, as liberal as it was. Churches were everywhere, and Christianity was certainly the religion of the day there when I was a kid. Now, 30 miles down the road, you know, in Dearborn, Michigan now, I see on the news every day, even down here in South Florida, when I turn on the news, I see that Dearborn, Michigan is one of the hotbeds of Islamic revolution fundamentalism anywhere in the world going on, just 30 miles from where I grew up in a nice little Christian town. So even during the course of my lifetime, from childhood to adulthood, I've seen a demographic change from Christianity to Islam in an area surrounding. We've seen, for the very first time in human history, the very first Muslim mayor of New York City recently was sworn into office. And so we're seeing a transition, I would suggest, that we would never have thought. So when, when the writer of that article said, if somebody asked you in the 1900s where the heartbeat of Christianity would beat the loudest, the cities they would pick, in 2026, like, oh, let's see, 1900, 2026, 100 and some odd years later, where will the heartbeat a century and a quarter later, where would be the loudest heartbeat of Christianity? They would have said London, Rome, New York City, or maybe a Midwestern New York, Midwestern American city. But if we look at the statistics now, as of the middle of 2026, that is not the case. The data is in, and here's what comes back. Overall, in terms of Christians on the earth, there are 2.63 billion Christians on earth. That's a healthy number. That is 32.2% of all people on earth. That's almost 1 out of every 3 people on the planet Earth is now a Christian. And this ties into what, 2,000 years ago, Jesus talked about the Great Commission. We're going to talk about that Great Commission. And we're going to talk about how its fulfillment ties in and gives us a hint that we are at the very end of the end of the last days, and Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. That's why we talk about Bible prophecy here at South Beach Gospel Ministry so much, because it ties in so much to what our mission is with regards to the gospel, and it ties into us being able to watch the time clock that God has, the nation of Israel, and the current events in the news. We're supposed to be able to watch and see what's going on and be able to divine the times. And so we find out then that 1 out of every 3 people on earth now is a Christian. And while the raw head count is climbing, the market share of Christianity is actually wobbling, it says, because Muslims are growing at a faster clip in certain high density areas. So you've got now Christianity and Islam kind of, battling side by side. And with regards to a demographic standpoint, Christianity, without question, is moving south. Not like south from the upper Midwest, Michigan down to, say, Georgia or something. No, but the real south, like the deep, deep global south. And so there was a report from the Center for Study of Global Christianity, which is based out of the Gordon Conwell Divinity School. That's, a school that trains, different pastors. And Gordon Conwell, very well-known academic. They tend to be kind of liberal, but from an academic standpoint, they have a outstanding academic reputation as a seminary. They've come to the conclusion that there's a staggering shift in Christianity. Nearly 70% of all Christians on earth are now, if you can believe it, in Africa, Asia, and parts of Latin America and Oceania. So the centroid of Christian power is shifted from North America, from the United States and Western Europe, to Africa and Asia. That's unbelievable. Africa is the absolute powerhouse according to the statistical assay. It says by the start of 2026, the number of Christians in Africa has surged to over 770 million. That's shocking. That is, 750 million in Africa alone. Undisputed leader in the world now in Christianity is the continent of Africa. Who would have guessed that in 1900? And Europe, on the other hand, where Christianity really spread from England to the new colonies, and it exploded in the new colonies here in the United States of America, and again, we became the worldwide leader in evangelism of the world and sending missionaries all around. But Europe has seen its numbers decrease. So Christianity, without question, is dying in the West, where we came from, Western Europe. It's slipping down to 550 million people are switching out of their faith in the West at rates never seen before. So you now see a drop in Christianity in the Western nations and growing, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So, they asked the question in the article, you've heard people say that Christianity is dying. Well, that's kind of true depending upon where you're at, but it's not true in other places. It says, well, if you're sitting in a half-empty cathedral in Belgium, it certainly feels like Christianity is dead or dying. But if you're in Lagos, Nigeria, or in Kinshasa, which is in Zaire in Africa, it's a boom town. And so who are these 2.6 billion people? And the article breaks down who these people are and where they're at. And it points out, and this was shocking to me. I mean, I knew that there were a number of denominations, but there are now 50,000. That's astounding. 50,000, 50,000 distinct denominations now. And they're broken out into 4 main categories. And we're going to talk about who is what and what's what. I mean, I was talking to a good friend of mine, Marcella, a week ago. We were talking about Christianity and what types of Christianity. And she would ask me, like, well, what type are you? And I was trying to explain what an evangelical Christian is as compared to what a Roman Catholic is, as compared to what, say, a Jehovah's Witness or a Seventh-day Adventist might be, and how they all sit under the umbrella called Christianity, but they're distinct groups. It turns out there are 50,000 different distinct groups. Leader of the groups, here's our top 4. Roman Catholicism is still, the 90-pound, the 100-pound gorilla in the room or whatever. The heavyweight of all the groups is still the Roman Catholic Church. They have now reached 1.3 billion. Last I'd heard 1.2, now they've grown to 1.3 billion. But more interestingly, is Protestantism, and that's a broadly based, and this is part of the conversation I was having with Marcella, that Protestantism is such a broad term. It can include Baptists, it can include Methodists, it can include Anglicans, but we can have diametrically different views of a Southern Baptist and the view of someone who is part of, let's say, the Anglican communion. That's going to be night and day, almost as if they weren't the same. So that's the toughest group to categorize because it's so broad and diverse. But Protestantism is on the rise as well. It has now grown to 1.1 billion people. So now Protestantism is only 200 million people behind Roman Catholicism. Protestantism is catching Roman Catholicism at a rate never heard of before in the history of the world. So once upon a time, there were 1 billion Catholics, and then you had about 700 million Protestants altogether. Now you have that number growing up to 1.1 billion, meaning that there are only 200 million people out of first place in terms of Christian denominations. So the next denomination, that's the one, the third place, will be the one that a ministry like, say, South Beach Gospel Ministries would fit into. Ministries like Calvary Chapel, independent evangelical Christian churches. And that was part of what I was trying to explain to Marcella a week or so ago. You have these independent Bible fundamentalist groups, and then you have Charismatics and Pentecostals. They make up the third group. So the third group, which would include us and probably many of you guys that are watching, even though we do have people that are Roman Catholic, people who are agnostics, watch and comment and things of that nature. But most of us will probably fit into the independent Christian, which is the evangelical banner, and or Pentecostal or Charismatic. That's the third group. And that third group is now the fastest growing group of all the top 4. The fastest growing group is this group, Independents and Pentecostals, which includes Charismatics. 680 million, but growing faster. And in fact, they did the statistical essay, and they say that the independent Pentecostal and Charismatic movements are the fastest growing religious phenomenon in not the United States of America, but in the history of the planet Earth. The fastest growing religious phenomenon of any religious belief in human history is the growth of independent Christians and Pentecostals in the last several years. We are up to 680 million people. That places us squarely and strongly at the third position of the 4 major denominations. And then the fourth category is the Orthodox Christianity, which includes Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Ethiopians. There's so much talk about the Ethiopian Bible, and is it the oldest one, is it the best one? And really, Eastern Orthodoxy really broke off from Roman Catholicism and became, sort of the Byzantine Christianity became the Eastern Orthodoxy, or the Eastern wing of the Western Roman Catholic Church. So it's really Roman Catholicism East, and that would include major denominations like the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, Coptic Christians in Egypt, and so on and so forth. They're the group that's suffering the greatest loss. They are at 290 million. That's compared to 680 million, which is our number of independents and Pentecostals that are the fastest growing religious group in the history of the world. Below that is the Orthodox. This drops all the way down to 290 million, and that's concentrated mostly in Eastern Europe and Ethiopia. And that has seen the greatest shrinkage. Now, they've suggested that there's some sociological, maybe some international reasons. The war in Ukraine has affected things between Russia and Ukraine. A number of those individuals were Russian Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox, and population as well. And then they broke down demographics with regards to generations. Generation Z, the youngest generation, the new generation, actually, shockingly and surprisingly, has caused a rebound. Millennials here in the United States of America have largely rejected Christianity, and Christianity dropped off to its lowest level ever with the millennial generation. But the new generation, Generation Z, I guess they became so disillusioned that now it appears that the very youngest of the generations, Generation Z, has now made somewhat of a comeback, and the drop in Christianity amongst the youth seems to be declining and may have leveled off with the rise of a resurgence in Christianity amongst the Generation Z. 61% of Generation Zers believe in some form of Christianity versus 55% in the millennial group. So that actually is a 6% increase over what the millennials were at. And so the youngest adults are believing at a higher rate than the generation before them. We talked about 55 versus 61, so maybe there isn't a complete total secular collapse amongst the youth in America, and maybe Jesus is making a comeback from the youth is kind of the way I interpret the data when I'm looking at it. Okay, so let's break down, where do the top 5 Christian groups in the world live? And so we're going to break it down into the, kind of almost like, ranking the NCAA football, Michigan ranked 1, and Ohio State 2, or whatever, so on and so forth. A place where, in terms of population demographics, the top 5, very important. The worldwide leader in Christianity in terms of mass numbers is still the United States of America at 220 million. However, the demographics show that that share is falling, and that number may be somewhat artificially enhanced by immigration. For instance, certainly prior to the Trump administration, under the Biden administration, under the Obama administration, immigration has increased. So you had open door policy, and a number of these individuals would come into the United States. Some from Central or Latin America would already have a Christian background because of Catholicism. And we're going to talk about how Catholicism's dominance in Latin America actually itself is shrinking shockingly as well in a couple of key points. But that mass of immigration kind of artificially inflates the number. But when you include, the long time standard, North American residents dating back to the 60s and the 50s and the 40s, combined together with influx of new immigrants that have the Christian faith, we're at 220 million. That places us at number 1 at the top of the top 5 list. And so, again, that number is falling in terms of share in comparison to other groups, but we're still at the top. Coming in at second place, Brazil at 170 million. So 50 million behind is the nation of Brazil. That's kind of surprising. Brazil isn't nearly as large as the United States of America. There are a lot of Christians there. But what's most shocking is that Brazil, which used to be a stronghold of Roman Catholicism, 99.9%, of the populace of Brazil, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s was Roman Catholic. But now we have seen a massive shift from Roman Catholicism to Pentecostalism, which is part of that third group. I told you Pentecostals, Independents, Charismatics make up that third group, which is the largest and fastest growing group of any religious persuasion in the history of the planet Earth. And that has completely reversed the landscape in Brazil. Once upon a time, being a fundamentalist or Pentecostal or Protestant Christian in Brazil could be dangerous to your health, but so dominant was the Catholic Church. That's no longer the case. Brazil has massively shifted from Catholicism to Pentecostalism and independent Christian belief. They're at 170 million. That places them at second place. Third place, Coming in at number 3 in the top 5 list at 118 million Christians is Mexico. And Mexico is still, as once upon a time Brazil was almost all Catholic, in Mexico it is still the case that it's well over upper 95 and northward, 95% or more are going to be Roman Catholics in Mexico. So you got Mexico at number 3 at 118, almost all, but or at the very least overwhelmingly Roman Catholic. But the shockers are number 4 and 5. The 4th and 5th spot has completely changed over the course of, say, the last 5 years. Shockingly, both the 4th and 5th spots are held by countries not from North America, not from Europe, not from Latin America, but from the continent of Africa. Coming in at number 4, the shocking, surprising, and fastest growing country in the world in terms of Christianity is none other than Nigeria at 110 million Christians in the nation of Nigeria. And Nigeria, by the way, was the topic right here at South Beach Gospel Ministries. Towards the end of 2025, we talked about it, and at the beginning of 2026, how persecution and martyrdom in Nigeria is as bad as it's ever been anywhere in the world, with like 20,000 Nigerian Christians being killed, just in like the last 12 to 18 months, which is unheard of. It got to the point where, President Trump on Christmas Eve threatened to bomb, Nigeria if they didn't stop killing so many Christians. And we talked about how that's primarily the efforts of the Fulani Brigade and Boko Haram, which are radical Islamic terror groups that literally will march into a church, drag out all the people, take them captive, and then chop them into pieces, like with machetes, not like holding them for ransom or whatever. Like, we'll literally go into a church with a bunch of machetes and start chopping people into pieces, drag them off into the jungle and crucify them. Those types of things have been going on at an incredible rate in the last, 36 months, I would say. Again, over 20,000 Nigerian Christians have been martyred in the last year or so. And that is the paradox that ties directly into Scripture. And, I put this data into AI, and they came back with a surprising conclusion as well, and we're going to get to that. But again, Nigeria, the most persecuted Christian country on earth, is also the place where Christianity is growing the fastest of anywhere on the planet Earth, showing that persecution of the church leads to real deal Holyfield type Christians. And we see that in the book of Acts. We see that in the New Testament. When Christianity could cost you your life, the church exploded. And we see here in the West, where Christianity has always been the mainstay, it's beginning to die and slow, and people are becoming less and less interested in it. And we're going to conclude with why that is when we get to the end. Okay, let's go ahead and talk. The wild card here, before we get to that, let's get to number 5. Coming in at number 5 on our top 5 list is the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's also an African country, and they weigh in at 105 million Christians. So you've got Nigeria coming in for the first time ever at number 4 at 110 million, Congo at 105 million. Probably by the end of the year, the way the statistics are going, demographics are changing, probably before the end of this year, Nigeria will surpass Mexico as the 3rd most populous Christian country on earth and take the number 3 spot. By this time next year, that is to say by the summer of 2027, rapture not occurring first, you probably will see Congo also passing Mexico, so that our top 4 would be the United States of America, Brazil, Nigeria, and the Congo, so that 2 out of the top 4, probably by this time next year, 2 out of the top 4 countries on earth will be from the continent of Africa, which is shocking and amazing. The wild card there is the number 6 spot. The number 6 spot is held by, guess what? The nation of China is, is coming in at number 6. And if you can believe that, China comes in at number 6, and let me give out gospel tracts. Hey guys, got little comic books here. Here you go. Comic book. God bless you guys.
We are glad that you are a friend of ours.
All righty. And there's one from Mom as well. God bless you. All right, guys. Okay, so before the storms come, have to multitask here, passing out our gospel tracts. Coming in at number 6 is the People's Republic of China. Communist China is now at number 6. That's unheard of. That's impossible. How could that possibly be? In 1900, in the early 20th century, could you imagine that the most dominant spots on earth for Christianity would be Africa and communist China? That shows you that God is no respecter of persons and that he's doing stuff in the most difficult places for Christianity to spread. That's where it's passing and spreading the fastest. And we talked about even amongst Generation Z over here in the West. You know, the idea that kids hate religion may be somewhat on a reversal trend, but the most shocking is Africa's dominance of the top 5, and China is about to move into the top 5. We could see a position where this time next year, Mexico is replaced, and you got your United States, Brazil, Nigeria, Congo, and China as your top Christian nations on earth. Okay, so let's get to why are we seeing numbers switch. Religious switching is a concept called where you give up your religious faith for another, or you abandon your religious faith altogether. What we're seeing from the statistics is that religious switching is a huge factor in the United States and Europe. For every one person in the United States and Europe that joins the Christian faith, 11 individuals abandon the Christian faith. That's shocking and almost unheard of. That is to say, for every new convert, 11 defect out of the church in the West, the United States of America and Europe. However, in Africa and Nepal, for instance, which is in the Far East, close to China, for every new convert, or for every 11 new converts, you have one defector. So you have an 11-to-1 gain. Like for every person that abandons the Christian faith and goes to something else in Nepal or Africa, you've got 11 joining. An 11-to-1 increase, whereas in the United States of America and Western Europe, for every new convert that we can make passing out gospel tracts, 11 people abandon the faith in Christianity. And so the average Christian in the world today is, according to the writer of the article, no longer a white man in a suit in the West, in New York City somewhere, but it's more likely a young woman living in a village in sub-Saharan Africa or in a bustling city in Brazil, or goodness forbid, maybe even in China, which is unheard of since it's a communist country and officially an atheist country. So, okay, this shift changes everything. So the translation then is that the global South tends to be more socially conservative but more economically progressive. And they've suggested from a socio-political standpoint that might be one of the reasons for the transition in Christianity. Focusing on poverty and justice and conservative traditional values rather than the traditional Western church, which is based upon wealth. And I think the takeaway translation there is that the church in the West, including the United States and Europe, is beginning to die because it's getting fat, soft, and lazy. As we were overwhelmed with prosperity, and God blessed America more than maybe any other country in the history of the world, particularly after World War II, when we represented or acknowledged the creation of the nation of Israel and post-World War II economic boom. That blessed us, but also it maybe softened us and made us more morally lax. And then we got the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973 and the 100 million aborted American babies. That too is part and parcel of why the population of Christians in America and in the West is dying. So, translation, church in the West is soft, fat, lazy, where it's growing in Africa and in the East, including places like China and Nepal. So persecution seems to cause a thriving environment for Christianity. And so the youth bulge in Africa and Southeast Asian Christian communities is undeniable and conspicuous. And they also came to the conclusion that people are moving away from big formal institutions like the Vatican and the Anglican Communion, the Vatican in Rome, the Anglican Communion based out of London, England, to storefront and charismatic and local independent churches. For many years here at South Beach Gospel Ministries, man, you know, like 15 years, we had a little house church going on in people's homes, whether it be in Dorit Nora's house or it was in my house or in somebody else's house. You know, we would have you know, a church session, you know, in somebody's home every Thursday night or every Wednesday night for like, 15 consecutive years or so. And that was many people's way of saying, the traditional church is not really, these big mega churches you see on TV seem to be based more on interest in prosperity and helping get wealth into the church and helping you get a promotion on the job than it does promoting the gospel around the world. So the bottom line then is that the world is not getting less religious. It's just getting more complex. Christianity is growing in raw numbers, and it is in fact dying and losing its dominance here in the West, in the United States of America and Europe. It's a paradox, but Christianity is on the rise. It's on the growth. While it's dying in the West, it is growing worldwide. When I put these numbers into ChatGPT and asked them to crunch the numbers and come up with a conclusion, it came up with some interesting points. It says, yeah, Africa is the new center of Christianity, and that no one in the 1900s would have thought that Africa, that the top Christian countries of today would be Nigeria, Congo, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, are all strongholds of Christianity, and all of them are in Africa. And they are the most vibrant. And why is that? Well, birth rates, again, you don't see people in Africa running off to the abortion clinic every time somebody goes out, to a party on the weekend, like, uh-oh, we had an accident, let's run over to the Planned Parenthood Center and get ourselves an abortion. You don't have high school kids flocking to abortion centers in Africa or in communist China or in Russia or anywhere like that. So again, I think that here the West falling in love with the abortion on demand concept has really dampened the growth of individuals, and as a result, our population is dying and our Christian numbers are decreasing. The biggest surprise, according to ChatGPT, of these statistical assay would be China. It says China officially remains an atheist state under the Communist Party rule, but researchers estimate that tens of millions of Christians worship there in unregistered house churches. And the article describes them as a wild card. Why? Because they're outside official registration. The official state church of China was endorsed by Billy Graham, but it's corrupt. It's run by the Communist Party. Billy Graham and the Communist Party founded the Christian official church system in China, but the real believers are underground in house churches, and if they get caught, they get sent to work camps and punished. But ChatGPT comes up with the conclusion: persecution often strengthens commitment. Now, if a robot, a machine, a computer can figure that out, we certainly should be able to draw that same conclusion. And it says, throughout history, Christianity has been persecuted the most in the Roman Empire, Soviet Union, and Communist China. And the attempts to suppress Christianity in those places produced highly committed believers. And then it goes on to quote, it says, as the saying goes, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And that's shocking, coming from ChatGPT. If ChatGPT is telling me, well, the reason is, don't you know that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, according to many sayings? And Chinese, over there, they've looked for something, it talks about, after decades of rapid growth, many Chinese have sought answers about purpose and life, morality, family, hope. Christianity provides a coherent worldview and community rather than large, empty, hollow cathedrals. China has apartments, homes, and small Bible studies, and that's where Christianity is growing because they are harder to eliminate than the big places. And it talks about in Europe. ChatGPT says that Western Europe has experienced declining church attendance, fewer baptisms, fewer clergy, increasing religious disaffiliation, meaning they convert to Wicca, they convert to Islam, they convert to the New Age. Countries like Sweden, the Netherlands, and Belgium, and the Czech Republic, which used to be Christian strongholds, are now the most secular societies on earth. And many churches in Belgium, Sweden, the Netherlands, Western Europe have become museums, tourist sites, concert venues. And so I asked them to come to the conclusion, ChatGPT, why is it declining in the West? And ChatGPT says the same thing I believe. Greater material prosperity. People who feel economically secure may feel less need for organized religion. Individualism is another reason. People are skeptical. I talked to one of my friends, who's a graduate of the University of Miami, degree in biomedical engineering. We talked about skepticism. Like, well, you can't really prove any of the things you say about Jesus to me scientifically. And so I'm skeptical. And so you see, particularly here in the West, particularly well-educated people are skeptical about things in the Bible because the Bible is based upon faith. And then it goes on to talk about scandals in the churches, fertility rates. Again, ChatGPT says fertility rates and birth rates, and that's impacted dramatically, particularly here in the United States, which is now the worldwide leader in abortions. We have more abortions per year here in the United States than every other country in the world combined together on a yearly basis. So again, that's impacting Christianity. And it also talks about religious switching. In the West, people are abandoning religion for a no religion position. Pentecostalism and independence are growing extraordinarily fast in places like Brazil, Nigeria, Ghana, South Korea, Guatemala, and the Philippines. And so again, that third grouping of the big four, that third grouping is the fastest growing group. Energetic worship, emphasis on conversion and evangelism, and a rapid church planting ethos is what makes that third group. Independents like us. That's why we're out here. We're out here passing out tracts. We got a storm coming in. I'm out here passing out gospel tracts. And that's what people like us do. We do the Great Commission. And that's among the reasons why we see these things happening. So let's take a look with the time we have remaining, what the Bible actually says about this and tie it all together. We find out then that in Scripture, we see that Jesus gives us a command. In Matthew chapter 24, which is where we get our Olivet Discourse, we see that Jesus said this, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." So we've come about full circle, and I would say that it's exciting to see kind of the conclusion that I drew is that we've come full circle in terms of Christianity. It started out in Jerusalem when Jesus gave the Great Commission, Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations. And it started in Jerusalem, went to the Mediterranean world second, went to Europe from the Mediterranean world. From Europe, it went to North America via the American colonies that became the United States of America. And from the United States of America, it spread around the world. And as a result, now that it's dying here in the West, in the United States of America, the centroid of Christian power seems to have shifted to the long-lost continent of Africa, deepest, darkest Africa, and communist China, if you can believe it. That, to me, signals us what? That Matthew chapter 24, verse 14, has literally been fulfilled already, and we are at the end of the end. I'm going to read that again for you. It says, Matthew chapter 24, Olivet Discourse, that famous Bible prophecy seminar Jesus gave, said, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come." You couldn't say all nations have been preached to in even as late as 1900. You can say that now. And then we go on to Acts chapter 1. What does it say in Acts chapter 1 verse 8? It says, "But ye shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be my witnesses unto me." Jesus is saying, "unto me both in Jerusalem and in Judea, and in all Samaria, and unto the uttermost parts of the earth." Have we seen that happen? We've seen that happen. It went from Jerusalem to Judea, and now it's gone all the way around the world and winding up in Africa. What is this gospel then that Jesus said is going to be preached around the world? Well, you know, the most famous and simple of the verses is what? John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." And that's really one of the simplest and the most awesome of the verses. What other ones do we have? John chapter 10, let's go ahead and take a look at verse 26. "But ye believe not, and ye are not, if you believe not, you, because you are not of my sheep, as I said unto you. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand." That's another recitation of the gospel. How about a third one with the time we have remaining? Well, Jesus said this in Acts, or Paul wrote this in Acts chapter 4, verse 12. It says, "Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved." And that name is unquestionably what? Jesus. not Jehovah, not Yahweh, not Muhammad, not Allah. Acts chapter 16 says this, and let's go ahead and take a look at verse 30. It says, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And he said, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved, and those of thy house." So believing is what gets you saved in the gospel. And believing in what? In Jesus Christ and his death on the cross and his resurrection. And let's go ahead and take a look, if we can, with just a couple of more verses. We got a couple of minutes left. And let's go ahead and close it up here. Here's another incredible verse for us. But God commanded, taking a look at Romans. Romans is a great place to get some simple gospel verses. It says in Romans chapter, 3, verse 22, "For the righteousness of God, which is by faith in Jesus Christ unto all and upon all them that believe. For there is no difference, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." Goes on to say in the next chapter, Romans chapter 4, verse 8, "For God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." So Jesus died for us on the cross when we were sinners. We're looking at my favorite 10 gospel passages that you can share simply. Memorize these and give them to your friends. Here's another one. Here's 8th of the 10. Romans chapter 6, verse 23. You guys know this one. "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord." You don't pay anything. You don't have to join anything. You don't have to do anything but believe, and it's a gift. You accept it. If I offer you a gift and you accept it, you've got it. How about this one? Romans chapter 10, verse 9. And it says this, "That if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved." Not that you might be saved and that you have to do penance and that you got to do good works, but if you do bad works, you'll lose your salvation like you could lose a wallet. You shall be saved, and that's it. And then let's go to the final one for the day. And any one of these 10 can be shared with someone and can result in them receiving eternal life and you receiving a crown of salvation as a soul winner. And let's go to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. This is a simple one. I really love this one. It says this, "For by grace are ye saved, through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, and not of works, lest any man should boast." So that's Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. That famous passage that says it's by salvation by grace through faith alone, not of works. So you can't get any credit for helping Jesus save you, because it was all based upon what he did on the cross 2,000 years ago. And that's why Christianity is now, as he told us, it's going to start in Jerusalem, go to Judea, and then it's going to go into the uttermost parts of the world, and then the end shall come. We've already seen, as I said before, we've seen the transition that it has taken, which is really kind of shocking. We've seen it go from Jerusalem to the Mediterranean world to Europe. Dying in Europe now, it's come to North America, where it's now the biggest platform of Christianity in the world. But even as it's dying here, it's now exploding in Africa and China, which is shocking and unbelievable, and showing you that the power of communism can't stop the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the power of martyrdom and taking the lives of the believers of Jesus, as we see happening every day in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, cannot stop the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes it. And so with that, then, we're going to end it right there before the storm clouds roll in. We are at the end of the end times, my friends, and we can see the prophetic passages showing that the gospel has, in fact, transitioned from here in the West. Is it dying here in the West? To a certain extent, you could say it is, but overall, it's exploding around the world. And that's good news, as we've gotten, as I said, soft and fat and comfortable here in the West. And, now people aren't as interested because we don't need God as much. But in places where God really is needed, like Africa or communist China, it is exploding. They're growing, and amazing things are happening. We should, if we're saved and believers, we should be excited about that. Why? Because, I'm a proud American. I want America to be number one. We are number one statistically in terms of numbers, but I'm happy to see Christianity spreading to areas where once upon a time it was thought it could never flourish in communist China. It could never flourish in Africa. Goodness forbid, deepest, darkest Africa, these syncretistic ceremonial rituals that they practice and so on and so forth. Who would think that communist China and Africa would be the centroid of power of the church as we approach the rapture? That, my friends, is a fulfillment of Matthew chapter 24, verse 14. It's spread all the way around the world, and the very next thing to happen is the end shall come. And with that, we're going to keep looking up for that end, because the rapture is coming, and it may be coming sooner than we all expect. So as always, I say, keep looking up, for our redemption is truly and honestly drawing nigh. God bless you guys.